equipment are strictly prohibited in the concert hall. Please take this moment now to silence your cell phones. Thank you.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Susan Engel, and our panel. And I'm delighted to welcome you to this very special Folks Forum on Law, Culture, and Society presentation tonight. Esteemed authors Chris Buckley, former Congressman Steve Israel are with us to discuss political satire in the age of President Trump and their respective new novels, and I'm sure we'll touch on current events as well. Their novels are The Judge Hunter by Christopher Buckley and Big Guns by Steve Israel. And both novels are available for sale. I invite you to join our authors after the program for a book signing in our adjacent lounge. Also, don't miss our next Folks event on July 9th is the always popular Law of the Land Supreme Court Year in Review analysis with an excellent panel of legal experts. This event sells out every year, so I encourage you to visit our website, 92y.org, to purchase tickets and ensure your admission. Back to tonight. I'm once again privileged to introduce our esteemed moderator. He is an essayist, novelist, and distinguished fellow at New York University School of Law, where he directs the Forum on Law, Culture, and Society. A longtime good friend of 92Y, he has been moderating programs on this very stage for more than 15 years. Please give the warmest 92Y welcome to Mr. Thane Rosenbaum.
Hey, Thane.
Such a warm welcome. Thank you. Welcome everyone here at the 92nd Street Y for the Forum on Law, Culture, and Society. And yet another conclusion to a year. We have an event, Law of the Land. But this is a special night and a funny night. I hope you were ready to laugh, because that's what this night's going to promise. You know, we're living in enormously interesting times, as you know, and such times it helps to have a sense of humor. Tonight's event is being live streamed, but for the large number of New Yorkers that are here, you all know that we always thought Donald Trump was funny. You know, no, but even the old Donald Trump, when he was the Donald, you know, he was sort of funny. And all right.
We'll put you down as an undecided.
This was the reality TV Donald Trump, but now he's funny with a sort of nervous laughter. It's different. It's a different kind of humor. It's important to speak about this question with two of America's finest political novelists. First, both of whom happen to be friends, and I'm very grateful for that. First, Christopher Buckley, who is the dean of political satire.
Yay.
You know him from many satirical novels of political bent. Thank You for Smoking, The White House Mess, No Way to Treat a First Lady, Little Green Men, that's one of my favorites. Florence of Arabia, one of the great titles of all time. The Supreme Courtship is a novel I had a small imprint on, tiny, small little influence. And his most recent book, The Judge Hunter, which we'll talk about, and we'll have him read a piece from today. Let's see, what else do you might not know about Chris? For years, he was the managing editor of Esquire. He was an editor-at-large at Forbes, I remember that. He was a former speechwriter for Vice President George H. Bush when he was a very young tyke out of Yale.
HW.
HW, right, HW. And for many years he also had a column on the back page of the National Review, which was a magazine that was started by his father, William.
I was fired.
But yeah, I want to talk about that.
Yeah, we should talk about
It's the consequences of satire. And I want to also say, not only have we been friends for a very long time, when the Forum on Law, Culture, and Society was started many years ago, He was one of our first guests, the very first guest we had when we introduced a film, because we did Thank You for Smoking, and we had Chris afterwards. So, Christopher Buckley. Another good friend, 8-term congressman from Long Island, who has one of those districts that is Nassau County, Suffolk County, and Queens.
Right.
I think you even have my neighborhood in Brooklyn. I don't know how that's possible. After today's Supreme Court decision about gerrymandering, we should actually ask you about this. Steve actually rose to become, I think, the 4th ranking member in Congress. He was the head of the
Democratic Congressional Campaign
Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee.
Yeah.
What is it called? It's CCD or DCCC. It sounds like a bra.
It's
I did that for
that was
Buckley,
nice.
who I thought would love that line.
nice.
It's a CCC something with the D. He has been an assistant whip. Now he's left Congress this last term. He's now a political commentator for CNN, and he's a contributing writer for the New York Times. And he directs the Global Institute out in Long Island University. And you should know that he and I are now in business. Global Institute and Folks have a joint partnership, and we're going to be doing a joint film festival on political films. And we're going to look at classic political movies and have political leaders and journalists discuss them after. We're going to have at least 1 or 2 this summer out in Long Island, and then in the fall and winter, we're going to do 2 in New York.
I nominate Thank You for Smoking as one of the political films.
We should, yeah. I think that's a great choice, and he can't refuse at this point.
That's right.
And he's also now, he's pursuing a new passion other than the fact that I think he just got married, which was another,
yeah.
Congratulations to Steve Israel.
Thank you. Thank you.
And this is his second novel, Big Guns, and he'll be doing a short reading for that. So yet once again, Steve Israel.
Thank you.
So let's start off with political satire has a time-honored tradition in our country. Both of you followed this for different reasons. My understanding is that it goes back at least as far as John Adams, who hated it so much that the Alien and Sedition Act may have been inspired in part from his experiences with that.
In fact, he had Benjamin Franklin's grandson, Benny, jailed for his satire. It was, I mean, this was
without the Sedition Act.
Yeah, and he died. I think he died in jail, but of yellow fever, but age 30. But he was the Benny Bache was his name. Was jailed for. Now this wasn't, of course, satire as in ha-ha, as in Saturday Night Live stuff. This was, really with the dagger in. But
right.
It was. Yeah, and the Alien and Sedition Act being probably one of the worst pieces of legislation that we've ever passed.
Until the next one that we pass.
Although, yeah, there have been a few
Probably
others.
moral.
Yeah.
But from the very origins of our country, we started off on the wrong foot. And that was because we had, I guess, an overweight president with a thin skin who didn't.
That's good.
That's good. You should
But-
write a
but-
book.
Writing that down.
But you guys can
I'll
take
split
that.
it with you.
But what do you do in a situation? I mean, President Trump can't take a joke either. Does it help? First of all, do we know whether any of our political leaders relish these things and felt flattered by it? Do we know if in history, do we know any political leader who said, God, bring on more, it's hilarious, my grandchildren think it's funny, it's lovely, or do we find that there's something about the political animal that simply doesn't want to be criticized? Do we know anyone?
Well, I served for 16 years in Congress and learned
60?
16. Felt like 60. Left undefeated and unindicted, which is rare. But I came to among the lessons that I learned is that most people in politics have rather large egos and are wrapped in rather transparent skin, very thin-skinned, and so I don't know of any political figure who enjoyed being made fun of, But I will say this, when I was writing Big Guns, I wrote it on my iPhone and my BlackBerry. I was kind of trained to
But
write,
you
'cause in real
reportedly
time-
wrote
a novel on
I
your
did.
iPhone.
But including your
And-
first novel on terrorism.
Yes, all written in real time. So during markups and hearings and Democratic caucus meetings, because who wants to pay attention to all that stuff? And it got to the point where my colleagues knew that I was writing, possibly about them, and many of them would approach me and say, Israel, you writing a book? I'd say, yeah. And they'd say, am I in it?
Did they want to be?
Because, in Washington, the way we read books is, you start with the index. It's like we're all
Right.
Jews. You start from the right and read to the left. So you start from the index. If your name's not in there, it's a trashy book. You don't read it. And they were disappointed. If I said, no, you're not in this book, they'd be disappointed.
My dad used to send out his books, and he would send them to Norman Mailer, and he never heard back from Norman Mailer. So the next one he sent out, he wrote next to Norman's name in the index, "Hi, Norman." That's great.
That's great.
So you wrote this book on your iPhone, really?
I did. Yeah.
And now you can't stop.
And so I think I developed this kind of thumb memory thing. The first book that I wrote, The Global War on Morris, I had never intended to be published. It was my release. It was my therapy. It's what I did to just relieve myself of the pressures of being a newly elected congressman in the Bush administration. And since I never believed it would be published, I just, I'd hear something, see something. I'd be across the table from President Bush. He'd say something, and I would just kind of write it. And wrote the entire manuscript. Stumbled onto an agent who brought me to Simon & Schuster. They bought the book. The book was published. And now I'm cursed because I can only write with my thumbs.
I mean, really?
No kidding.
Yeah.
No kidding. Don't hold it against me.
You may get carpal thumb.
I have these aches and pains, yes. But, as a Democrat, it's mostly my left thumb. So it's...
So
okay.
It's important to strategy.
is there anything that you could tell us, both of you, that you think is off limits? Here's why I'm asking. I'm thinking about, the Muhammad cartoons, which I know that they violate blasphemy laws. Remember, blasphemy sort of functions as a religious edict as opposed to sedition on the political side. But I think of the Muhammad cartoons as political satire, not really religious. I mean, I'm sure I could get in a real argument with the Taliban on this, but
Yeah, you could.
It wouldn't work out so well for me. But I'm wondering whether, that now that we're much more guarded nowadays about what we can say, and maybe tonight we'll also discuss political correctness in the age of political satire as well, but I've got that for later. And I'm wondering whether you have your own feelings of self-censorship. I can't help it. I look at your face, Chris, and who I'm reminded of, your close friend Hitchens, Christopher Hitchens, who was one of your best friends. Mm-hmm. And I know that was a huge personal loss, and he would have loved tonight. He would have loved to be on this stage with us tonight, because
He wouldn't have needed me or Steve. or
definitely
possibly.
no, he didn't. No, I've been on stage with him.
Christopher loved to. He was really when it came to the phrase épater les bourgeois, to shock the middle classes. No one did it quite like Hitch. You would you'd pick up that week's issue of Nation magazine and say, "Oh, here's a takedown of Mother Teresa," calling her the slut of Calcutta.
So he had no self-censorship. Do you and Steve Israel?
Well, I haven't attacked Mother Teresa yet. Didn't someone just try a comedy about the Holocaust or set in a death camp? And am I misremembering?
It's
this?
been done.
Hogan's Heroes.
Yeah. No. Well, there was the one that is
yeah.
the one that is called is seen as
POW camp.
execrable is the Jerry Lewis film, which no one's ever seen. The day that the clown died, no one's actually seen it.
Set in a death camp?
He plays a clown, Jerry Lewis, in the best period of his career in 1960s when he was the flower of France. He made a Holocaust film the day the clown died, and it is. I've been trying to watch it and not watch it for years. I've been trying for years, and apparently it's unwatchable, and no one can actually.
It's a comedy?
It's a comedy. It's a. I mean, well, he's leading children out. I mean, it's just really hard. I get chills when I think about that he tried to do this. But yes, there are some people.
Well, that quite
But
marvelous movie,
Benigni-
Life is Beautiful,
yeah, Benigni-
was I would call it a sweet, sad comedy. And,
the title itself was offensive.
yeah.
Well, okay.
But back to, well, I wrote, my, I guess, daring moment, and aren't I brave, was to make a hero out of a tobacco lobbyist.
Yes.
And that was thought, when the movie came out,
This is Thank You for Smoking.
this is Thank You for Smoking, and the trailer was playing, and I happened to see it. I was sitting in a movie theater in Washington, D.C., in back of three I'd call them old ladies, and on came the trailer, and they were just looking at you and going, "I never." So that was a good moment.
Steve, anything you wouldn't write about?
I would not be offensive about anybody's family. I would not, I think we draw our own lines. I would not tell anybody else what lines to draw for themselves, but I draw my own lines. And
But
so
even
I
if
won't
you-
be insulting.
But fiction
somebody's
gives you the
physical
right
appearance.
to reinvent a family. So if you reinvented a family, your colleagues on Congress, when they asked you, are you writing about me? If they knew you were writing a novel, they would say, even if you changed the name, it would be obvious to
Yeah, but
someone
they're fair
who
game.
it is.
They're fair game thing,
Yeah.
those people.
But would their families be fair game? I mean,
No, not for me. No, I don't believe they would be fair.
Right, so you would.
By the way, I should say that for anybody who aspires to write political satire, this is not the dean of political satire. This is just the gift that we have. He is, so my inspiration, my decision to go into political satire was this man right here, was Christopher Buckley. He is the best of the best, and he is not a dean, but a teacher to us all. And I think part of the reason is that he has taught many others how to weave that line. There is a distinction between parody and satire. There is a distinction between making a point and being insulting. And I think Chris taught many of us, in fact, I know that Chris taught many of us how you navigate that in telling a story.
I've been criticized. One of my books was reviewed by Mordecai Reckler in the New York Times.
This is the author who wrote The Apprentice of Duddy Kravitz.
And
Solomon Gursky was here, a Canadian Jewish writer.
And this was very exciting to me. I thought, wow, Mordecai Reckler. So I began to read it. He got around to mentioning my book in paragraph 9. It started off, one afternoon after a boozy lunch in Montreal in 1953, I knew this anecdote was going to go on for a very long time. But he criticized me at the end. He said, he doesn't draw blood. He said, to write effective satire, you have to draw blood. And I wasn't sure whether or not I should feel chastened.
Yes.
I mean, I aspire more and fall very short of the Woodhouse paradigm, rather than the, the satire that leaves blood on the floor. And I think your instinct is also, if I may, gentlemanly and gentle. Although you seek to instruct, I think,
Right.
in your very fine books.
Right.
Have there been any inhibitions for either of you? Have there been any consequences to any of your writing? I know that we jokingly said, I might have mentioned this before, that you actually, for your father's magazine, which you ended up writing the essay in the back, and you didn't even write it in that place. You wrote it in the Daily Beast.
I was fired for voting for a Democrat.
Right. You supported Obama in 2008.
Yeah. So that wasn't really satire. Although,
well, it was
retrospect,
but the title.
It seems pretty satirical.
No, but there was satire to the way it was titled, remember?
That wasn't my title.
I know that.
And it really, may I use the P word, really pissed me off.
So tell us the title.
Well, I was one of the first bloggers. Oh, what a boast. For the Daily Beast, which was, just starting out, Tina Brown's latest venture. And about 2 weeks in, I wrote what I think you could be reread as a perfectly thoughtful column articulating why I had become disenchanted by John McCain, to say nothing of Sarah Palin, who would have moved, the Oval Office that much closer to the moron factor, and why I was excited about the possibilities of Barack Obama. And Tina was very excited about this. And next thing I know, I look it up and it says, "Sorry, Dad, I'm voting for Obama." So I called her and said, "Could you please take that down?" And she said, "Yes, dearie." And it's, I think, still in the archive. So that was, that just showed.
The readers at the
Actually,
National...
that was one of my disenchantments, because I realized that anything I do is measured against my DNA.
Yeah.
And so I've pretty much stopped writing, political journalism, and write only if I feel that impulse, I write for the Spectator of London, because I thought no one knows the name Buckley over there. So I wrote something, and in the letters, I'm reading the letters column in the next issue, and it refers to me as a hereditary non-entity. So apparently they have heard of us over there, but so I just give it up altogether and write historical novels set in the 1600s.
Yeah, which we're going to get to in a second.
They won't be able to find me.
No. Steve, when you were in Congress, we'll talk in a minute about why you left, but I'm assuming one of the reasons wasn't because you said, "I really want to write these novels, and it's going to be a problem doing it while I'm a congressman." Did you feel that in any way, that there would have been a consequence to staying in the House if these books kept coming out?
Some of my colleagues have read themselves into the novel and have expressed their anger with me. Not a lot, but some. I'll tell you the moment when I realized that I wanted to spend more time writing and less time politicking. I was the chairman of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, as you said. I've never heard it referred to or analogized to a bra, but okay.
I think you can donate more money that way.
Maybe. So I was in charge of all of the competitive campaigns across the country. My job was to defeat Republicans and to elect Democrats, a very partisan position. I was in the middle of writing what I thought was a particularly good passage. Have you ever been just in that flow, right? So I was in that flow. And I had received...
On your phone?
On my phone, and as I'm writing, I had received 3 messages from Nancy Pelosi saying that she really needed to talk to me about something. And so now I confess, and we're streaming, that I didn't return her messages because I just wanted to continue writing. And
wow.
Maybe that's why we didn't win the House back that year.
You should have called her back.
And that's when I began really soul searching and saying, listen, maybe if you're really enjoying this and putting messages aside from some pretty important people, maybe you need to spend less time with those important people and more time perfecting your craft, which is poking fun at Washington, D.C. in the best way I know.
I think that's a very nice epiphany.
There you go.
Yeah. And very unusual.
We're going to have Chris read just a page or so from the Judge Hunter. By the way, you know what I was reminded of when we were speaking? You and I actually watched Sarah Palin debate Biden together.
We did. I didn't mean to be glib a moment ago,
but
the glibness is my reflexive position. I'm sure.
Well, no, you were taking batting practice that night.
Is a lovely person.
Yeah, no.
But I was really kind of upset.
Yes, no, I know. I was sitting next to you. I saw you.
And here we are.
So this is the Judge Hunter. Let me just briefly set it up, and then I'll set up the reading. It's a very evocative title. We're in the 17th century. The reign of King Charles I ends when he dies. He's killed by a death sentence issued by 2 judges. A number of years later, the monarchy is restored to England with King Charles II, and he's decided, I want to find the guys that the 2 judges bring him in who sentenced my father to death. It just so happens those guys have gone to the New World, across the ocean. And remember, this is the mid-17th century, so this is 100 and some odd years before there was even a country in the United States. So they send sort of an inept some guy to go across the seas to locate the two judges. He becomes the judge hunter, along with a kind of mysterious other man who's already here, who works for the crown. And they sort of work their way around early Boston and Block Island, and they get themselves around, and they end up coming to New York. And so this scene is in New York. For those of you who love old New York, you're going to love this novel. And this is really old New York. This is Peter Stuyvesant, New York. For those of you who don't know, Peter Stuyvesant was more known not just because there's a high school in his name. Two of my daughters attended it.
He was named after that.
Yeah, he was named after the high school. People forgot, yes, he was the first governor of New Amsterdam. He was put there by the Dutch, West Indies Corporation. He was a sort of a perfect fictional character, right? Somber, religious, humorless, would have been perfect to poke fun at, and one-legged. And so this is the scene where the two judge hunters actually meet Stuyvesant, and he takes them somewhere. And one thing you should know about Stuyvesant, he too had a wall, and that's the setup.
They climbed aboard the carriage. Stuyvesant took the reins. The gate of the fort gave out onto a broad way that narrowed as they proceeded north. Stuyvesant pointed out various houses of prominent citizens, as well as a vast garden and greenhouse, his own, the latter filled with medicinal herbs brought from Dutch possessions in the tropics where he'd served. Old Petrus, that was his nickname. Mm-hmm. Old Petrus's pride was evident, even touching. The urban density thinned as they continued toward the town gate, where they arrived at a wall, an impressive palisade of 12-foot-high oak logs, tips sharpened to dragon teeth. Stuyvesant halted the carriage so his passengers could marvel at its extent. It bisected the island, stretching all the way from the North River to the East River, with 7 bastions spaced at intervals. It had been there now 15 years. He himself had contributed 150 gold guilders to its building. The contractor was an Englishman, one Baxter. Would they like to know what this Baxter now is doing? He has taken up a new career, stealing the horses of Dutch settlers on the Long Island. Stuyvesant made a reproving tuk sound with his tongue. Balti, that's the sort of feckless one of the pair of judge hunters, Balti praised his host's admirable wall and asked if it kept out the savages. Stuyvesant smiled. But the wall is not for keeping out Indians, it's for keeping out English. Oh, Balti said, unsure how to respond. Has it worked? Stuyvesant chortled. It seems not. After all, here are you. He added diplomatically, but you are welcome in New Amsterdam. Too kind. People now are saying we must have a bigger wall. Not on our account, I hope. Stuyvesant shrugged. If to this it comes, maybe I will ask your King Charles to pay for it. A most amusing idea, is it not, Hunks? Certainly, His Majesty would find it so.
That's great.
Very note the subtlety.
Yeah, subtlety.
The
And-
reference.
And now,
I'm not sure, do you think the audience got
I think
it?
they got it.
They got it.
This is the 92nd Street Y. It's a
No,
smart audience.
They're very educated.
They're very, very smart. You couldn't slip anything by here. So if you're a Wall Street lawyer, you know where that came from.
Yeah. No, I mean, the history, it's not really fake history.
Yeah. Well,
It's actual history.
this actually happened.
This actually happened.
This actually happened. I was wondering, people think that satire requires a certain degree of, irreverence, for sure. And people assume that irreverence comes from distance, that the outsider looking in is the person who might be best equipped to, the comedian's gift of being the joker, the jester, the court jester. But one thing is true of the both of you, you were insiders. And I wonder whether being an insider, we don't usually think of it this way. I mean, you come from one of America's patrician first families of observing the political scene. I don't, I don't know, what it was like for you to write speeches for George H.W. Bush. He seems sort of stiff, and I don't remember any particular witty things that we can say, oh, that was Chris Buckley.
He's next to my father, there's no man I revere more than George H.W. Bush, a consummate, gentle soul, a perfect Christian gentleman. He was not a real natural speaker. So if you were a speechwriter, the paradox was that he was really better without a text. But there was, I went down to Washington. I was 29. I was all dewy-eyed. I'm going to be, chief speechwriter to the Vice President of the United States. This is good. I thought, my speeches will be reprinted on page 1 of the New York Times. They'll be analyzed in the Kremlin. And then it took about 48 hours to realize no one cares what the Vice President of the United States says. And then one day, in December of 1981, the Cold War heated up because the Poles announced martial law. And so this was, a big deal. And, Russians were moving tank divisions in, and we went from, DEFCON 4 to DEFCON 3. I always wanted to be the one to pick up the phone, call the Pentagon, say, go to DEFCON 3. But sometimes I do, but it just remains at DEFCON 4. But anyway, so he was scheduled to give a speech anyway. And it was, sort of a goodish audience. And, we could never get press to come and cover Mr. Bush's speeches, especially in Washington. The only media we'd get would be the guy from C-SPAN, who would come and set up his camera in the back, and then hit the light, and then go smoke in the lobby. And this was just in case someone shot Mr. Bush, so they'd have B-roll, right? And but now, so the president's people decided, Mr. Bush had been a very loyal vice president, and they decided that Mr. Bush would give the official U.S. response to this terrible provocation. And I thought, yes, my day has arrived. So I wrote the speech with a little input from the grown-ups. And, being a highly intellectual and highly educated person, I, went to Bartlett's familiar quotations and found a quote from Thucydides about how, history regards well those who use their power with moderation. I thought this would be a signal to the Soviets. So I put the quote in. Mr. Bush is doing, and, it's a big audience, and, all the media are there. They're doing live feeds. Are we going to war? And I'm just, sitting there purring. Mr. Bush is up there. And I'm sitting at the staff table there with Admiral Murphy. He was Mr. Bush's chief of staff. He was a 4-star Navy admiral. I'd been with Benedict and monks for 4 years at a boarding school. And so I thought I knew about figures of authority. Then I went to work for a 4-star Navy admiral. And boy, are they strict. So Mr. Bush is up there, and he gets to the Thucydides line, and something went wrong. And Mr. Bush is, he's a Yale Phi Beta Kappa. He knew about Thucydides. But he gets to it, and he goes, as the Greek historian
And he didn't have a stuttering problem.
No.
Usually. So.
No. And I'm, and Admiral Murphy's looking at me like I said, I didn't make up this name. And he's like a parrot with a piece of banana caught in his mouth. And so it's like being in Lamaze class. I'm going, push. And finally, it kind of Thucydides, it came out. And that was my great rhetorical moment in the spotlight. Afterwards, Admiral Murphy came up and jabbed me in the chest with a very naval forefinger and say, next time say Plato. That was the dawn of the Platonic era
Yeah.
of Bush rhetoric.
So Congressman, are you an advantage when we read these two novels? Is it better that we got Steve Israel, the former congressman, to poke fun at his people? Or can you see the virtue of never having held elective office and imagining yourself as someone literally standing outside the Capitol, looking in and saying, look, I can just tee off on these guys?
Yeah, you know, as I said before, every satire has to have some truth to it, a kernel of truth. And I wrote these two books in real time, from the inside. You read these books, you know who I'm talking about. You know, that legal disclaimer, any similarity is unintentional. Not in these books. You know exactly who I'm talking about. Some of the characters are aggregates of different members of Congress or presidents or what have you. And I could only pull that off having been on the floor of the House with these people. I'll give you one example, and then I guess you want me to do a reading. You probably don't know this, but right off the floor of the House is what I consider to be one of the most cherished places in Washington, D.C. It's hidden in plain sight. It's a balcony. It's a private balcony. You go to the Capitol, you can stare up at it, but you don't know what you're looking at. What it is a balcony restricted just for members of Congress. So you can be beating the hell out of somebody on the floor and then walk 50 feet with that person and go out to the balcony and sit on cheap patio furniture and talk like human beings. Just have conversations. Talk about, you know, I just had a fight with my spouse. I thought we were going to be home for the weekend. They just called votes. I have 3 kids I'm trying to put through college. I can't afford it. I hate my party. I hate your party. It's a wonderful place. I hate you, right? But it's a wonderful place to kind of establish relationships and bonds that you don't hear about. And it backfired on me as I was writing this book. There was a very conservative member of Congress with a perfect rating by the NRA. And I decided, we're on the balcony, everybody's in a good mood. So I would kind of test my book out. Now, the pretense of the book is that Congress is considering passing legislation that mandates that every American must carry a firearm, with sensible exceptions for children under the age of 7. And so I'm with this member of Congress, and his name was William, but I called him Billy, and he was this gregarious guy from Missouri. And I said, Billy, think about writing this book. It's a novel. He said, tell me about it. I said, well, the pretense is that Congress considers a bill that mandates that every American must own a gun. And he looks at me and he says, wow, that's a really good idea. And now I'm panicking. I'm like, no, Billy, no.
It's a novel.
It's a joke, right? And he says, no. And this is what he says, and it's in the book. And I could only have pulled this out, pulled this off, had I, if I was with him. He said, well, you guys passed that Obamacare, which requires everybody to have health insurance. Why not pass a bill that requires everybody to have life insurance? The gun being life insurance. And that is an example of the value of actually being on the inside, talking to people who provided lots of content for the book.
And now, that was a good lead-in, and you also set it up so nicely. Yes, this comes in the novel. The novel opens up with Chicago's murder rate increasing even more than it is now. So the nation is truly in a crisis about what to do. And the novel is filled with incredible indictments on our democracy and the cynicism of our politics and special interests and political opportunists. And this is a scene that is familiar for people who watch CNN. This is your obligatory CNN a crisis on the scene moments where the CNN anchor is going to speak to a person who owns a gun shop.
Yeah, thank you. I appeared on CNN. I had a contract with them, so I spent a year on CNN. Now I contribute to MSNBC. But even in the green room and coming off of segments, I kind of observed what was happening and reflected it in this book. CNN anchor Beth Burrows locked eyes with the camera. A group calling itself Patriot Protectors is mobilizing on the border of Indiana and Illinois, she told her viewers, reportedly to defend Chicago. CNN's Joe Cook is on the scene with an exclusive interview. Joe Cook, dressed in a blue blazer and crisp khakis, stood in the parking lot of a dreary strip mall containing a fast food taco franchise, $1 boots and shoes, several vacant storefronts, and something called Big Bob's Gunnerama, fronted by a giant neon M16. A couple hundred of people scurried behind him, dressed in military garb, brandishing firearms of all shapes, sizes, and types, and loading crates of provisions onto an idling convoy of flatbed trucks. Joe, Burroughs said, the last time I saw a scene like this was at the border of Kuwait and Iraq. That's right, Beth, only it's not Kuwait, it's Stuttsville, Indiana. And I'm with one-town resident Bob Stork of Big Bob's Gunnerama. A very big Bob stood next to Joe. An NRA cap sat far back on Bob's bald scalp, and a black polyester polo shirt barely covered the pale overhang of his corpulent belly. He stared vacantly into the camera, his hands folded awkwardly at his crotch. Mr. Stork, Bob, owner of Big Bob's Gunnerama, where our aim is customer satisfaction. He smiled nervously. Joe nodded briskly. Okay, Bob, so tell us what's happening here. Stork leaned heavily into the microphone. What's happening, Joe, is we're moving out to protect women and children in Chicago now that the mayor up there just surrendered. The mayor tries to pass a law saying no guns are allowed in Chicago. Behind them, a small crowd waved exuberantly at the camera. The 1970s hit The Night Chicago Died blared from loudspeakers. Surrendered, asked Cook. Absolutely, Joe. His people are getting shot at, and his answer is to take away their guns. What would you call it? Well, you seemed heavily armed. Better be, Joe. You can't win a war with a pea shooter. Need heavy artillery, which is what we have at Gunnerama, including the Cogsworth AR-15 Justifier on sale this week. Joe Cook was visibly annoyed at this brazen attempt at unpaid advertising. He put his hand on Big Bob's spongy elbow. Bob took an alarmed step back. Now, said Cook, some would argue that what's happening in Chicago isn't war, it's crime, and that we should let trained police deal with that. How do you respond? Big Bob gave Joe a look that said, can you get me somebody from Fox News? What's happening in Chicago is a war, he replied, and the crime is that innocent people are defenseless. If the government won't protect them, we will. The crowd behind him cheered, USA, USA, USA. Joe turned to the camera. Brooke, you just heard it. Here in Stuttsville, people seem to be taking matters into their own hands. The matters in their hands were handguns, shotguns, and rifles, single-action, double-action, semi-automatic, sporting and tactical, bolt, lever, and pump, 5 rounds, 10 rounds, 20 and 30, in walnut and maple, and block polymer and composite camo. They were made by Colt, Glock, Ruger, Remington, and Smith & Wesson. They were named Protector, Defender, and Repulsor, and the Cogsworth AR-15 Justifier, available at Big Bob's Gunnerama while supplies last.
Very good. Excellent, excellent.
I told you that was a great scene.
All right.
That was a great scene. So do you think that for the two of you, given your insider status historically, and given that you're both thoughtful people, you're not trying to destroy the system, do you think that political satire can influence political policy? Do you think that there's God's work in a political novel? By the way, do we know of any political government official who's ever been laughed out of office? Where you can actually point to something and say, you know what, I'll tell you, that really changed everything.
So, a suggestion from the back.
Dan Quayle.
Oh,
All right, let's...
well, by the way, Murphy Brown is coming back to TV. I don't know if you, no, I'm not sure Dan Quayle is coming back. But the question, anyone, well, I think, you know, certain people have been, you know, one definition of satire is that mirror in which everyone sees a reflection except their own. You know, it was Roy Moore, not elected because he was, in effect, laughed out of. I didn't hear much laughter about Roy Moore. It really sort of sickened me that my former party would nominate such a man, you know, for the U.S. Senate. I don't. Did you find any humor in the Roy Moore situation?
Can you think of anything like this where, I mean, Watergate, Monica Gate, Mueller Gate, I mean, all the gates? Was it all, is it just Woodward and Bernstein, or did political satire also have an effect?
I would say in the grand sweep of American history, Mark Twain, I think, shed light on slavery. Joseph Heller in Catch-22, I think, shed light on Vietnam, but used World War II. So I do, look, I think satirists are patriots. There's this theory now that, and Chris and I have talked about it, that political satire is on hiatus because every day is a satire, in this country. And people just don't want to pay. I don't know how much it is for your book because you were kind enough to give it to me for free, but no, I bought it. I bought it at the Barnes and Nobles, right? People just don't want to pay money for satire when they can get a tweet every morning with moronic content. I hope that theory is not true because I really do believe that political satirists are a brand of patriots unto themselves. They are able to use humor to raise our consciousness. I could have written a book about why a bill will never pass Congress to reduce gun fatalities in this country. Maybe my mother would have bought it, but that's it. But trying to frame it in a sharp, satiric way, I think was more educational for people, exposed the issue more effectively than my just writing a dry policy book on it.
I think that's absolutely right, although I think your mother would have bought 2 copies.
I'm more...
I would never assume for myself the mantle of patriot, but it does remind me of one of my favorite New Yorker cartoons is a congressman sitting at his desk, and his secretary is approaching and holding what looks like sort of a blanket. And he's looking at her very crossly, and he said, "No, Miss Perkins, I asked for the mantle of greatness. That is the cloak of secrecy." Did you ever have one of those? But I don't, I sort of, for my part, and I encourage you to keep at it, writing. You've written, I don't know how you did, 2 terrific books out of the gate. I have sort of stepped back. There is vibrant satire going on. Trump has been the best thing that's ever happened to Alec Baldwin and Saturday Night Live. This is very good stuff. Whether or not you could make whether or not you could make literature out of it, I don't know. My publisher and editor is here, John Karp of Simon & Schuster, and it may be that he's, I don't know how many Trump books he's signed up. I have a feeling we're going to be awash in them, but they're going to have to be really, really good to outdo reality.
Well,
and my final point, not that I really have a point, but, is that I just don't, and I hate to say this, but I don't know if it's funny anymore.
Yeah.
I am profoundly depressed by what's going on in our country, and I have a feeling if you sort of make jokes about it, you're trivializing the outrage.
Yeah.
I think we ought to be hopping mad. Well, I think we ought to be, Howard Beale, call your office.
network.
But that sounds like a very priggish view to take, so I retract it.
No. But I'm intrigued by this idea. Do you think that this point that you've raised, is Trump in some ways satire-proof? Because satire requires something that's serious that can be mocked, but if something is already satirical on its face, it loses the ability to be parodied.
This is what I worry about. He is either by instinct or by design, he has figured out a way to impose this mess of fog on all of us. I mean, again, I was on CNN for a year, now MSNBC. How many times do you hear breaking news? How many times does the news cycle change now in a day? How many outrages are we subjected to? Now it's children being snatched from their parents at the border. That would have been a one-week news cycle. There'll be something else tomorrow. And I believe that there's this kind of sensory overload that is happening, where I'll give you an example. I happened at home, I had some guy come and do some repairs at my house today, and he was telling me what a fan of Trump he is. It's tough when you're a former congressman and people come to your house. It's, it's like, oh, I remember you, Mr. Israel. I know who you are. I know who you are. And he was talking about his love for Trump, and he said, I don't get you Democrats. I mean, what don't you like about him? And you know what? I had a hard time picking out that one thing. Do you ever have that experience? I mean, there's so much of it. So I do believe that he's kind of numbing us all and getting away with it to a certain extent. I think the midterm elections in 5 months could be a corrective. They need to be a corrective. But if not, I think we're going to have an even darker and rockier political period ahead of us than we have over the past two.
I wonder whether you think that we're heading into yet another phase of a kind of self-censorship, because people that wrote serious things against Trump were getting, slammed in social media by social media trolls.
Well,
all kinds of people have felt intimidated, threatened. Jews that were critical of Trump wound up seeing photos of themselves wearing concentration camp uniforms, that you can actually receive death threats. I'm wondering whether the political satirists look at this now and say, you know what, this is just not a fight I want to get into, because in the age of social media, people will attack me.
Well, one satirist lost his job at the Pittsburgh paper yesterday.
Yes,
Did you
yeah.
see that? It was
A cartoonist.
It was, I think,
cartoonist.
Rob Rogers, and they'd pretty much sort of stopped running his columns, and then 2 days ago, he was fired off site. They took his badge away, and that's because I think that may be a bit of I don't mean to sound alarmist, but that may be sort of a canary in the mine shaft moment.
I mean, it's almost like an executive order banishing or banning criticism of the president, but it's not done by executive order. It's just people who say, this is our guy, and leave him alone.
Well, the marketplace does it.
That's right.
This is a capitalist system, and the marketplace will determine that. Clearly, they were getting complaints, and this, which gets a little bit undermines the press's self-proclaimed status as the guardian of the public trust and virtue. Tom Wolfe used to say that the press doesn't really lead opinion. The press is the eternal Victorian gentleman who's always following opinion. But anyway, that happened. On the other hand, look, the Samantha Bee moment.
Right.
Now, she did not get fired for using a terrible crudity aimed at the
But Kathy
president's
Griffith's career.
but Roseanne was fired.
Right.
So, and I think
And Kathy Griffith
that
was
seemed
essentially
a little
fired.
uneven. Well, Kathy Griffin was fired.
Right, and so you can see examples of people in the public square who, here in the case of comedians, who's been punished, I would say morally censured by a community of people who think that this is inappropriate to attack our president.
Yeah, but I think the satirist must be careful to, proclaim him or herself as the guardian there. I mean, if this, think what it's like to be a satirist in North Korea. Well, gee, I don't think there are any.
Well, but the Egyptian,
or in Turkey.
well, the Egyptian Jon Stewart was jailed. Remember?
Yeah. So how brave are we? Not that brave. Yeah, we might lose our jobs, but so thus far they're not jailing us. Although maybe that will come in the second term. Something
Right.
to look forward
The
to.
canary in the coal mine.
A canary moment. Yeah.
Well, I'm wondering whether you see a connection between this and political correctness. That we're living in an age where we're just, there are comedians now that won't perform on colleges. They've just said, we can't perform on colleges anymore.
I know a lot of people who no longer. I wouldn't go to my alma mater,
Right.
which is Yale, which has become the poster boy for snowflakes.
So, but on the left and the
Where-
right? This is an example
Well, this
of,
is
This is
I
the
would-
left.
I would call this pretty left.
That's what I'm saying, that the problem now is, yes, Alec Baldwin is doing okay, but for everyone else in this business, if you're on the right, you're attacked by Trump supporters. And if
Yeah.
you're on the left,
Yeah.
you're attacked by whatever this is the era of the trigger warnings, microaggressions, safe spaces on campuses.
And the safe balconies.
And the safe balconies, right.
Wondering whether this is something that satirists sit around and say, there's no joke, I don't know, this is not a laughing matter.
Well, again, I think you have to draw your own lines. Like I have a problem with political correctness in the extreme. Chris's writing is respectful, it's sharp. I would like to think my writing is respectful, sharp, but we use our writing to make a point without being offensive, without calling people names, without epithets, and I think that's the mark of good, respectful satire.
But you're right, North Korea, you can think of other countries. You know, this is the privilege and luxury of living in a free society.
Absolutely,
Is
yeah.
that you should be able to do this, but we're actually facing an era in which we're exposed to a much harsher level of self-censorship.
Tom Wolfe, blessed be his memory, wrote an essay many years ago in which he recounts being on a stage at Princeton on a Saturday night, and he's on with Allen Ginsberg and Susan Sontag, and they're all lefties, and they're all decrying that the arrival of during the Nixon era that fascism has finally reared its ugly head, and the dark curtain of censorship is coming down, and you can hear the rumbling of the panzers, and he just quotes them all saying this and say, yes, how amazing it is that the dark night of fascism has descended in America, and all the left-wing intellectuals are denouncing it from a stage at Princeton on a Saturday night. This isn't exactly samizdat.
Right. Well, it makes one wonder, right, that there's a kind of smugness here whenever we experience anything that approaches it, yet this is not Egypt and this is not Turkey. There's over 200 journalists have been jailed in Turkey. We're not quite there yet.
Not nearly.
But we are at a point that it is disturbing.
And I think that's why Trump and his enablers speak so forcefully about fake news. What they're trying to do is discredit. We all know this. They're trying to discredit institutions, including literature, including the media, including reporters, because if you can discredit those institutions, then when they attack you or criticize you or satirize you, nobody listens. I mean, they've been completely vilified. I want to add one other thing. I think we're in a society right now where we are more polarized than ever, and that's contributing to the political environment we have now, and I think there are several reasons for it. One is congressional gerrymandering. Before redistricting became a political weapon, the chances were that if you lived in a community, you lived with Republicans and Democrats, went to work with Republicans and Democrats. After your day was over, you came home, you turned on the news, you got Walter Cronkite, you got news. Now, as a result of congressional gerrymandering, chances are that you live in a community that is either blue or red as a congressional district. And that member of Congress, when they do town hall meetings, they either hear blue or red, and they go back to Washington and vote blue or red. And you spend your whole day talking to fellow Democrats or fellow Republicans, and you're not getting any kind of diversity. And at home, when you come home at night, you turn on the television, you're watching MSNBC or you're watching Fox News. So the divisiveness in our media, in our neighborhoods, has literally, I think, it started to rewire our brains. I mean, we can go into this at another 92nd Street Y presentation on the political brain. There's a lot of work being done on that right now, a lot of research on how our brains are becoming more polarized as a result of this constant reinforcement in who we talk to, who we work with, what we watch on television. And we're going to need to break out of that. We're going to have to find ways of using institutions, the media, Simon & Schuster, publishers, authors, to bring us into a greater equilibrium over the long term.
But this is really, I mean, a very serious epidemic in some ways. The attack is against all of our institutions. You know, when you're attacking federal judges, when you're attacking journalism,
The FBI,
the FBI, everyone, right?
CIA, 17 intelligence agencies.
Right, 17 intelligence. Everything is under attack. Everyone's credibility has been questioned. Fake news. I mean, in an era of fake news, political satire, it can be called fake funny, right? That well, you're laughing, but you shouldn't be laughing.
It's good.
Right? That it's all fake. You can take that. That all of these institutions that are part of what it means to live in a liberal society are being questioned. The very heartbeat of our democracy requires people to be able to criticize and to be able to reflect on our experience. Instead, we're simply being told, he's not a real judge. That's not a real, everything is rigged.
The
Remember
Democrats
the
are
election.
the reason for the child separations.
The
It's
child
the Democrats' fault.
Well, also remember, fortunately, we didn't face this, but then candidate Trump told us that the election was rigged.
Yeah.
It wasn't rigged until after he won, but it was rigged. He was setting up the discussion, and he must have understood what he was doing. You know, this was a man that told us on the debate stage that, you know, I can go off into Fifth Avenue and murder someone, and my crew won't mind. And he's on to something.
He is
you know,
That also is coming in the second.
yeah, exactly. And I wonder, I keep thinking, you know, for those of you who are pushing the Mueller investigation, you're scaring the hell out of me, because he doesn't seem like a guy who's ready to go. He doesn't seem like a guy that's willing to say, yeah, you know what, I respect our institutions, and I understand that the FBI has concluded and the Justice Department has conducted the Mueller probe, and one has to remember, you know, for Folks Film Festival, we did the recount, the film recount.
Oh, yeah.
And we had a number of people, including Ron Klain, who will be here the night that we do Law of the Land. He's a columnist for the Washington Post, who is the character that Kevin Spacey plays in the film Recount is Ron Klain. There's this amazing scene early in the movie that is just something that is unimaginable in the Trump administration, that after the first vote comes in, Gore, I mean, it's still very uncertain, Gore is on his way to concede defeat. And there's this amazing scene where Ron Klain, again, he'll be here on July 9th for Law of the Land, is quickly trying to tackle him, stop him. He doesn't have to concede defeat. And he's saying, look, I understand the numbers are close, but I think it's important for our democracy, right? Al Gore says, it's really important for our democracy for people to have faith in the institution. I'm willing to step back and say, Mr. President George W. Bush. That's just not going to happen. That is just not, that is a Hollywood movie that will never happen.
No, to paraphrase the motto of the subject of Steve's really excellent satire on the gun lobby, I think Mr. Trump will not surrender the Resolute desk in the Oval Office until they pry it from his cold, dead fingers.
Right.
You all know that's the Charlton Heston famous line.
And he will not be impeached if there are impeachable offenses, and I think Democrats have to be careful. There should be an impeachment if there are clear impeachable offenses. But that is not a legal standard, that's a political standard. And that will not happen until House Republicans and Republican senators make the political calculation that he is costing them. When he and his politics become a threat to their next reelection, they will turn on him quickly. People forget that the famous conversation between some Senate Republicans and Richard Nixon telling him he ought to leave, that was only a few days before he left. They waited until the very end, then calculated he's going to bring us all down, and then convinced him to leave the White House. Until members of Congress make that same calculation, they're going to stick with him.
Except that Richard Nixon was willing to get on the helicopter. He was willing to wave and say goodbye.
Yeah, well, look, if Donald Trump believes that he can make more money in another gig, he'll not only say goodbye, but he'll raise a middle finger at us.
He'll be developing seaside condos in North Korea.
Right.
It'll be fabulous.
It'll be fabulous, right.
They'll be great.
Right.
Really, really great.
These are the biggest condos in Pyongyang.
So big.
Do you, for two of America's best-known political satirists on the field today, you guys are the guys. I just wonder, you came from Congress, you came from a political family. Does this seem surreal to you? our political time and
Yes.
moment?
No, I could, if I wrote a novel that simply recapitulated everything that has happened since the 2016 election, I would assume Mr. Karp would say, you know, Chris, maybe you should think about nonfiction. No, it would be, you know, unbelievable and not particularly witty, which is why I'm on hiatus.
So I'll share this with you. About 3 weeks before the presidential election, my former agent called me up. He said, I have an idea. He said, I'm going to pitch you on a book. He said, we all know that Donald Trump is going to lose this election by a landslide. He said, so I think what you should do is do a political satire of the 3rd year of the Trump administration, since there's no way he can win. And I went right to work, and I did a proposal. I went right to work on it, and I spent like 3 weeks on this, and I had, by the way, the New York Times did a story on this, so you can Google it. It's all authenticated. They said that had I done this book, my nom de plume should have been Nostradamus, because I had a furtive meeting with Putin where staff was dismissed. I had cabinet positions filled by crazies. I had Trump doing these tweets at 5 o'clock in the morning, you know, these rambling tweets. I had a lot of this stuff. And then the election came. I was at Hillary Clinton's campaign headquarters on election night. There was nobody in that headquarters who believed that she was going to lose the election. Nobody. So the next time you see me on NBC and a reporter says, what's going to happen, just disregard what I say, because I was pontificating on this victory. Trump wins, and I called my agent the next day and said, so can I still do this book? And he said, it's not funny anymore.
Yeah.
And that was the end of that book.
I'm wondering what your agent would say, or what you both would say to this, if it's not Donald Trump, if there was another character in this administration, someone else, who would make for an interesting character for be the basis of a novel, knowing that there is a president like Trump? Is there someone else that we look at now as a fiction writer and as a satirist that, I mean, it seems like you have a cast of amazing characters. You probably have difficulty picking one. In George W. Bush's cabinet, people Dick Cheney often was used, I think, as sort of a satirical cabinet official, the vice president. But here, it just seems endless.
Kellyanne Conway.
Kellyanne Conway.
I think she'd be a great subject for a next novel.
And to be the recognizable character in a Steve Israel.
I don't know what's going on there, but I think she'd be an interesting character for the next novel.
For you, Chris?
I'd be tempted to have a crack at Mr. Pence.
Yeah, yeah.
There's something, George Will, who is, you know, really the dean of an actual dean of conservative journalism, and a man of fairly equable disposition who does not, you know, resort to superlatives on either side, has called Pence the most repugnant person in American politics today. And you know, you look at him, and he's always in the background, but looking at Trump always with the hands down.
Yeah, yeah.
And there's something sort of magnificently awful. But again, I'm not going there.
I know you're not going there. Well, that's why I'm just asking you to speculate. Is there anyone redeemable? Is there anyone that's in the administration that you could imagine centering a novel around who has the kind of Jimmy Stewart moment, right? Or the Atticus Finch moment where you know, he moves or she moves through the novel and becomes redeemable at the end. Is there anyone here who do you see as a character study that would be interesting?
I don't think it would be Scott Pruitt.
No. McMaster, I think. I'd like to think that General Mattis is the one human being that stands between us and a nuclear apocalypse, because he is responsible. And I know him. I was on the Armed Services Committee. I dealt with him. By the way, I took Mike Pence to Afghanistan on a CODEL. And he was the same. I was just like stiff and reserved. We tried to leave him there, but NATO said no.
He was the governor of Indiana at the time?
No, he was a colleague. He was a House member.
Oh, at the time.
We did a congressional delegation to Afghanistan. He was on it, and same thing. Just hands down, and we didn't tell him when the military air was taking off, but somehow he found out and got on the plane with us.
Let's take a question from the audience. What is the impact, according to you both, that late night shows and similar types of programs have today on citizens? Do they promote civic engagement? And then he or she writes in a parenthetical, it's said many Americans get their political news through these programs.
I think there's a difference between what we see on late night television, the kind of literary satire that Chris does, that I do, and others. I think late night television is more a parody, less satire. You know, a parody is a punchline. A parody pokes fun at somebody's characteristics or the joke of the day. I think satire needs to be far more developed, far more nuanced. And, you know, a satire that comes with a rim shot, you know, I don't think that's satire. Secondly, more Americans are getting their news information from late night television or from whatever's being streamed from Facebook. That's what's so dangerous right now, is that you don't know what you're reading, its veracity, its provenance. But the fact of the matter is that particularly millennials are getting a lot of their information about on news content from late night television. And I'm heartened by that, because I think it could help rally and mobilize voters who did not vote in 2016, and now they can't wait to vote against these policies in 2020, and maybe even in this midterm election.
Joy?
I watch some of these shows. I think Stephen Colbert is a stunningly gifted guy. It's also nice to have a stable of 10 writers. If you take out it. But what I shy from, even as I laugh a little bit guiltily, is the smug factor. Mm-hmm. And I think it is at the real extreme of that, you have Robert De Niro's odd performance at the Tonys, which, you know, and Frank Bruni wrote a brilliant column about it.
It was excellent.
He said, it's an open letter to Robert De Niro and Samantha Bee. And he said, you know, if you want to re-elect a Republican Senate and Congress, keep doing what you're doing. Because, you know, and I mean this without any condescension, but imagine the viewer in Indiana, you know, who's watching the Tonys? You know, because it ought to be, you know, good, wholesome entertainment, you know, with the kids and the grandchildren. And there's Robert De Niro, you know, wittily saying, and, you know, the Colbert for the younger generation, it's just, there is, I think, a palpable whiff of, aren't we so smart that we don't, that, you know, we hate this other stuff, you know, and I think that's dangerous, and I think it really is off-putting, and there's, you know, there's some evidence. The pollsters are saying that, you know, a certain segment of the Trump voters, they're not really crazy about him, but they really don't like being made fun of.
Right, exactly.
And you're putting the lead in their pencil. So I would, that's my answer.
I wonder, though, whether this fits nicely with what Steve said about confirmation bias. Yeah. That in some ways we're all kidding ourselves. You know, we're at the 92nd Street Y on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. And what's being said on this stage by these two gentlemen who write books and have come from the different political culture, yes, it plays well here and probably to many people who are watching this live, but to a large segment of this country, they think we're a bunch of clowns.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, your guy who came to your house today to do work, if he watched this, he might not like anything that we just said for the last hour.
I agree with you. You know, there's this huge debate about what I call the Democratic message melodrama. You go to a Democratic fundraiser these days, no matter where you are, and no matter what's being discussed, the first question is, why don't Democrats have a message? And then the questioner will then tell you what the message ought to be. I was at a fundraiser for a Democratic candidate just 2 weeks ago on the 64th floor of the ironically called Trump World Tower. And it was for a Democratic candidate. And about 40 people. It happened to be a fundraiser for Congressman Adam Schiff, who's my best friend, and not only in, well, there you go. Adam is truly, was my best friend in Congress, one of my best friends in the world. And he was talking about Mueller and talking about Russia, and the first question is, why don't Democrats have a message? And Adam said, well, Israel used to run the DCCC, ask him, you know, he knows something about message. And I said, what do you think the message should be? And there on the 64th floor of Trump Tower, the message should be, let's impeach Donald Trump. Well, that may be the message on the 64th floor of Trump Tower, but I'll tell you what, the reason Donald Trump is president is because we did not talk in a resonant way to voters in Michigan, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Florida, and several other states. And you can't message to people, you can't tell people what you think, you have to understand how they feel. That's what went wrong in this campaign. We had a 52-point plan for everything, and Donald Trump was just listening to what they were saying. We've got to.
All right, can we just have this woman
We've got to do a
leave
better
early?
job when we try and figure out messaging, not pontificating based on what we assume, but by tapping into the anxieties of those who could have been with us. I'm told that 25%, final point on this, about 25% of uneducated white males who voted for Donald Trump voted for Barack Obama twice. Voted for him twice. Why would we want to marginalize these people and make them feel as if we are better than them? We ought to be embracing them with more constructive solutions to the ones that this president is imposing on them, which are destructive solutions.
I think that's a very good point.
These are two wonderful novels. Our two novelists will be outside signing them. You should own these. You should have them signed. It's worth owning these things.
Collect them
It's a
all.
way. It's not only. It's a way, frankly, for civic engagement and a good laugh. We'll see you on July 9th for Law of the Land. If you're not already a member of the 92nd Street Y, please do so. Also sign up for our email list at folks.org. And I want to thank our two guests, novelist friends, Steve Israel, Christopher Buckley. Good night, everyone. Thank you.